Well, welcome to all the attendees. First of all, I'll give you guys a little heads up on how to run this thing. Now, I hope you can see yourselves on the little board over to the right. If you have a question, look for the little hand icon, and if you click in the box where your hand is, then that will tell me that you've raised your hand, and then I can unmute you so that you can ask your question. Now what we're going to try to do is hold all the questions until the end. Kari's presentation is a little bit shorter, Lauren's is a little bit longer, so hopefully you'll remember your questions, but write them down. You can also use the chat mode if you need to, and so you can type your questions in there and we'll keep our eyes open. So let's get this started, and Kari will be the first one. Give me 1 second. Sorry, at the last minute I had a little help. Welcome to Kari White. She's the Genetic Programs Coordinator of the American Gelbvieh Association, and she's going to give us a bit of a roadmap on how ultrasound data is used and how it comes in and is used by the different breed associations. So we'll get started, and I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and I'll keep an eye out on everybody else. Thanks so much for attending, everybody. Go ahead, Kari.
Okay, thanks, Vicki, and thanks for everybody for logging in tonight. I know that it's difficult sometimes to find time at night, but hopefully you'll find this instructive. I'm going to talk a little bit about how ultrasound data is submitted to breed associations. Obviously, I know a little bit more about the Gelbvieh Association, but I would think it works this way in some form for all the breed associations. And then Lauren's going to talk a little bit more in depth about how that's used in genetic evaluation and things like that. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So where to start? You all know this probably a lot better than I do, that we really start with barn sheets. At the American Gelbvieh Association, members can actually log in to their member page and download barn sheets in two different formats. One is electronic, like you see here, and the other one is a PDF. And so, you know, I was talking to Becky today, and obviously some of the labs really prefer the electronic format so they can process everything digitally and not have to type in registration numbers and things. This one is blank, but for the Gelbvieh Association, it fills in the registration number and tattoo automatically. So that information is in there and you don't have to worry about getting it correct on your own. And so as we can see, if we go back, there's a lot of sort of important must-have information, specifically like the weight, ribeye area, IMF, that kind of thing is must-have information. And then a lot of the times there will be optional information on those sheets. I think the Gelbvieh one has temperament on it, hip height, scrotal circumference, status or disposal code. Those kind of things are just sort of repeated records that we like to see sometimes if you have extra time to put those on. But really the most important data on that sheet is animal identification. So at the breed association level, we process everything through based on registration number. And so if that number doesn't match the record we have on file for the tattoo and prefix, then it won't go through, it won't upload. So it's really important that we get that animal identification correctly. You know, sometimes you can mix up those 3s and 9s and 5s and 8s and that kind of thing, and so it's important that you either take special care in writing those down or have them done digitally, like I said. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I also think it's just easier for the labs if we can make sure and have all the animal identification correct from the start. And also, I think it's important that you check the rules at your respective breed associations for data submission. Some associations might require other data to be submitted before you can actually submit the ultrasound data. So for example, American Gelbvieh requires that all of those animals have weaning weight information submitted before any ultrasound information can be uploaded. So that's important. And I know, like, if you call our office or any other office, they sure would be happy to tell you what steps you have to follow to get that done. At Gelbvieh, we get data back directly from the lab. Technicians send results to the lab, and the lab sends them directly to us. We get them in a text file like this, just columns of information for upload into our digital registry. And just a friendly reminder, this is where you will get errors if you don't have it together when it comes to animal ID. And so that makes everybody frustrated. We have to go back to the lab, who has to go back to the technician, who has to go back to the breeder. So if we all just get it together here, I think it'd make everybody's lives much easier. And so what the producer gets once that data is submitted is that the data is adjusted and ratioed and then reported back to the breeder. And every association will probably be a little bit different in the format, but this is an excerpt out of the American Gelbvieh Registry that sort of just summarizes that information, tells them what they were in their contemporary group, how they're ratioed, that kind of a thing. And so that's what the breeders are wanting to see when they get their stuff back, and what they want to print in their catalogs usually too. And then that information is sent on to our National Cattle Evaluation for EPD and index production, which Lauren's going to talk about a little bit more. And it's important that you note what the acceptable age range is for your respective breed associations for that ultrasound data to be included in their evaluation. I know there's BIF recommendations, and I'm not sure if every association is a little bit different, but definitely something to note so that that data will actually be included in the evaluation and not thrown out because it's outside of the age window. And so I know that was short, but I wanted to leave time for Lauren's, which is a little more in-depth, and we'll have questions at the end. So Vicki, if you want to take it from here.
Hi guys, I'm back. Sorry, I was trying to figure out. One of our attendees lost audio, so I was just trying to figure out what happened with that. But Lauren, are you ready to go?
Hey, this is Kathy. Lauren is calling in right now, so she'll be on in a couple seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we should be able to hear her. We gave up on trying to get her connected.
Okay.
Something went down with her. So she's going to give her presentation without the visual.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine. I guess, yeah, we'll just kind of wing it. We'll go a different route. I guess if Lauren's going to she'll do her presentation, which means that everybody can, after we can probably post the presentation later, Kathy, I suppose.
Correct.
We can probably make it available. Okay,
yes.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I guess we all just have to pay better attention and ask good questions.
And then in the future, we'll make sure that we have copies of the presentation on hand in case something like that happens.
Sounds good. Lauren, are you there? We'll give her just a second to get caught up with us here.
Okay. Just hang on one more moment, Vicki.
Okay, not a problem.
Why does it sound like a box?
I'll double check all the attendees here who are on to see if there's any other questions. Okay, Bob's back on. We're good there. And then, okay. Bill still seems to be having an issue. Let's check out Bill's. Oh, he's okay. Alrighty. We should be good to go as soon as we get Lauren online.
I believe she should be on any second.
Okay, not a problem. Well, Lauren started with Simmental here a short while ago, and she's going to be working with primarily, I guess, with Kathy's husband, Dr. Wade Schaefer, and Steve McGuire, working with American Simmental's genetic evaluation program. She's done a lot in the industry, so she's a great source of information. So if you guys ever have any questions for Lauren, she probably would be very willing to take them. She's done a lot, and she's a lot of fun to hang out with as well.
I shouldn't say it. Let me see what's going on.
It looks like Kari still has control. Is that?
That's fine.
Okay.
We don't
wasn't
have,
sure.
yeah, we don't have anything for Lauren.
Oh, that's true, I suppose.
Hi, are you able to call in? You are? Sure. Okay. Listen only mode. Did you put in that webinar ID? Did it ever ask you for that? Okay, hang on. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I don't see you in here to unmute you. That is strange. Okay. Guess that's all we can do. Vicki?
Yeah?
I don't know why, but she cannot get through on the phone either. This is kind of strange. So here's what we could do is, I know that there's credits offered for this, so we can record it and then give you the recording.
Yeah, that might have to be. Yeah, it's crazy. Sorry, guys, we'd had all this practiced out three times, and
it's worked great. In fact, an hour before the meeting, it was working fine for all of us. But I think that's what we need to do. Okay. Well, we can certainly do that. Let's go ahead and record Lauren, and then we'll post it to the web, and we'll make it available for everybody to catch up and watch there. At the moment, then, let's open it up for questions for Kari, if that works out good. And then we can give Kari the run through, or open up questions for her for a few minutes, and then I guess everybody's off the hook a little earlier tonight. So, are there any questions out there?
Let's see. Eric Gelbvieh has an unanswered question. I'm going to see if I can find it.
Okay, Vicki, there's a little pane there. It says questions.
Mm-hmm.
It should be in there. I just think they clicked on that though. Oh, Skype, hang on.
Well, it told me before.
I see.
And it worked out. Okay.
What? Robert Williams. How has the trend of all Carcass ultrasound data numbers fluctuated for the past years? And how have the numbers of genetic testing fluctuated in past years? Are we seeing the breeders more apt to spend more money and resources on genetic testing and dropping carcass testing?
So I started working at American Gelbvieh in, I think it was 2012, so I can only speak from then. But, you know, it seems to me like we've seen pretty consistent numbers of ultrasound carcass testing that way. They definitely haven't decreased for us. And then, of course, DNA testing has increased quite a bit. But it's still very important to get those phenotypes in. For ultrasound, that's really important, even to the genomic data, so that we can train on those phenotypes and things like that. So I would definitely say that ultrasound is important, and you know, buyers still look for that kind of information and things like that. We pull a lot of sale catalog data pulls, and people, it's really important that if they have ultrasound data, they really like to see it pulled for their catalogs.
Don't worry about it. Okay, if anybody has more questions, it's easier if you guys would raise your hand if you do have a microphone. Then we know to unmute you. If you don't have a mic, then go ahead and use the chat. I guess I mostly see people asking or commenting on that they lost their sound and things like that.
Yeah, and I don't see any. I see that there's people with a question, but I can't find the question.
Well, kind of in the area where you see the word chat, that panel, there's questions like 2 above it, above the chat panel, but I don't see any more questions in there specifically.
Okay.
In fact, now they're all gone, so.
Okay.
I don't know why. So that looks like it for questions. Oh, I see. Hey, they've changed this since we used it before with this part of it, but Vicki, if you click on the question mark, a larger panel opens now, and it's easier to read it.
Okay, I see it now.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob says all is well. Oh, yes. Thank you, JR. Yes, Kari comes to us from Gelbvieh, and Lauren comes to us from Simmental, and they actually replaced members of the UGC board, Robert Williams and Wade Schaefer. Robert Williams was with the Charlotte Association, and Wade was with Simmental. So thank you for that, JR. So, yes, we're very happy to have Lauren and Kari with us. They've been a great addition so far, so we're hoping to put them through their paces in the next several years. So that's great. And we answered Eric's Skype or Hangout. Did you see this one? Kari, how would you defend Carcass ultrasound to a client that is wanting to use the I50K or the 50K?
I'd say that Carcass ultrasound is something that we see that buyers still really value. So I think it's a market signal. And then I also think that before it's very important to still collect those phenotypes so that we can train on them so that, you know, those genetic tests have validity in predicting for Carcass traits. So I think both are very important.
And I can add to that just a little bit. I mean, as we're working with the 50K within research, you know, we ourselves don't know everything that the 50K can give us. So, you know, we're still in the discovery phase. So, but we know what Carcass ultrasound can give us, and there's such great value to that information that it's only going to make our 50K and our genomic data just that much stronger. So, you know, like Kari says, you know, we really can't go without the two. We need as much performance data to go with the genomic data. Let's see. So, are there any other questions, guys?
Vicki, as you can see on your screen, Lauren has joined us.
Ah!
Yeah, I'm back on.
Do you want to go for it, Lauren?
I can.
All right, let's go for it.
Can you make your screen large for us?
I can. Let's see here.
Slideshow.
Slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay, how's this?
Excellent.
Does it look okay?
Yes, it looks wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Or yes, so glad to have you back. All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute.
Sorry about that. That's one of the problems about living in a small town. So I guess a lot of you are probably used to things like this. My internet went out for some reason. I don't know why, but it did. So anyway, I was unable to hear Kari's talk, so I have no idea what she talked about, other than, you know, how you all, you know, when the breed associations get our data. But I'd like to talk to you about what happens when breed associations give it to a genetic evaluation entity. Okay, and I'll just give you a little historical perspective of it first. You know, for years we've known how important reproductive growth and carcass traits are to the beef production system. And, you know, but in the 1970s and 1980s, when breed associations were first doing genetic evaluations, they focused primarily on growth traits, and that's just because reproductive traits were and still are hard to measure, and they're usually not very heritable. And as far as carcass traits go, carcass data collection has, you know, for the actual carcass has been difficult, expensive, and limited to only slaughter animals. It's very hard to collect these things, and if you want to prove a bull, you have to do progeny testing, but that can take, you know, 4 to 7 years or so to get enough data to prove a bull. So back in the late, let's see, now this isn't wanting to advance. Okay. Okay, so back in the late 80s, early 90s, researchers at Iowa State University were looking at real-time ultrasound to use for carcass trait evaluation. And ultrasound, you know, obviously you guys know all this. It's collected on live animals. It's very non-invasive. But it was also less expensive and faster to prove a bull because you could collect it on a larger number of animals than with traditional carcass progeny testing. So that really kind of got a lot of the breed associations Carcass evaluations going, because we could, collect all this ultrasound data. Before we only had, maybe 1,000 Carcass records. There just wasn't that much, but this allowed us to get the data that we needed to do an evaluation. So why do we want to do an evaluation, a genetic evaluation? And essentially our goal is just so we can compare animals within some kind of population just for their genetic worth as parents, because we're always selecting new bulls and, replacement heifers and stuff. But we need to do that through genetic evaluation, primarily because genetic effects are transmitted from a parent to an offspring, but environmental effects are not. And, an animal's phenotype consists of both genetic effects and environmental effects. And so we want to remove those environmental effects from the phenotype and just get at the genetics so that we really know what we're dealing with. And it's just an example of like a nature versus nurture type thing. You might, maybe I'm going a little bit too fast here about the environmental effects, but those are things like, say you have two calves and one, was born in Montana, another one was born in Texas. They both weigh, say, 70 pounds. But how much of that is, let's say that they're of the same breed too, but how much of that birth weight is due to the environment that those calves are brought up in? Like their dams provide an environment too. Say that a calf, out of a 2-year-old dam probably isn't going to weigh as much as one out of a mature dam. So you can't really compare those two calves' birth weights. You can't say, oh, they're identical and, that must mean they're the same kind of animal, because these environments can have a lot of effect on the actual phenotype. So that's why we do genetic evaluation. We want to strip out that environment. And so what we do, like just a basic methodology, is we want to combine, to get at a carcass trait genetic evaluation, we want to combine ultrasound data with pedigree records on all the animals involved, DNA test results, and I'll talk about that in just a second, and then carcass data from actual slaughtered animals, which we don't have that much of, but that is what we're trying to measure, so that is the best data we can get. As far as DNA test results go, we do put those in just like we do with ultrasound. I did do a talk here a few years ago for this very same thing about how I really don't think that DNA is going to eliminate ultrasound. We're still going to need both so that we can, continue to refine the DNA test, and so that we can continue to enhance our existing carcass data on slaughtered animals. So anyway, so we combine all four of those kind of things to put in a genetic evaluation. And we first look at the data to make sure that it was collected at or near 1 year of age. And that's just so that we're kind of comparing animals, so they're at a similar level of development. We don't want to compare a newborn calf to a 2-year-old heifer, for instance. They're going to be at different developmental stages. So we want to verify that all the records were obtained between 270 to 500 days of age, and this is for the IGS evaluation, of which Simmental, Red Angus, Shorthorn, Limousin, Gelbvieh, who else? well, that we evaluate as a multi-breed evaluation. But that's what we use as far as an age range. Different breeds have different age ranges. But this is just for ours. And then we also want to verify that the measurements are biologically possible. And in that case, say we look for animals with negative ribeyes. Okay, if they have a negative ribeye, they're out of we eliminate that record. Or say that we have a 1,000 square inch ribeye, we'll eliminate that as well. We just want to make sure that the records look okay. Okay, and then once we edit out all the data to get data that looks good, and it's from animals that have like all their information looks correct. Then we form contemporary groups with them. And a contemporary group is basically a group of animals who are similar in age, and with the IGS evaluation, we do make sure that they're born within 90 days of each other. They all have to be the same sex, whether they're intact bulls or steers or heifers. And we do differentiate between the bulls and steers. And we also want to make sure that they've had the same management from the time they were born, like, whether they were located, in the same place, they were on the same pasture, maybe they were supplemented with the same kind of feed. And for ultrasound, when we develop ultrasound groups, we take the yearling contemporary group for an animal, and then add the scan group information, which includes the tech, the lab, other kinds of the feed codes, things like that. And then we also add the scan date. So they all have to have the same information for that to form a contemporary group. Okay, so once we have this data, then we run it through some specialized software, and it uses really highly sophisticated statistical methodology, which is called BLUP for short, and that stands for Best Linear Unbiased Prediction. And that's just a statistical term. You guys don't have to know this or anything, but basically it's a system of linear equations. And I don't know if you all remember this from high school algebra or not, but it's basically solving a system of linear equations, like where you get the two equations with the two unknowns and you have to solve for x and y. It's like that, only there are millions of equations and millions of unknowns. And so, we run all the data through that to get EPDs. Okay? So then we wind up, we get EPDs on a suite of different carcass traits. We get ribeye area, marbling score, fat thickness, carcass weight. Some breeds have yield grade. With Simmental, we have Warner-Bratzler shear force. And we also have an index, which is based on carcass traits, called the terminal index. Different breeds have different EPDs, but this is what our suite is. Some have percent retail product. Others have different indexes that they use. We're probably one of the few, the IGS is probably one of the few with Warner-Bratzler shear force. We got that data through an old project run by NCBA, probably about in year 2000 or so, and they collected actual tenderness data on some slaughter progeny that they had. So when we get these EPDs, we have to know how to interpret them, and remember that they are a way to compare animals for their genetic potential as parents. So suppose we have two bulls. There's bull A and bull B. I didn't come up with any cute names for they have ribeye EPDs. Bull A has one of a +1 square inch, and Bull B has one of a -0.5 square inch. So how do we interpret these? We say on average, because, you know, that's the science of genetic evaluation, and we're all dealing with like normal curves and averages and things like that. So we always say that on average, the ribeyes of Bull A's progeny are going to be about 1.5 square inches larger than the progeny of Bull B's. And the way we compute this is we just take like the 1 plus 1.0 from Bull A, subtract it from a minus 0.05 or 0.5 from Bull B, and that essentially, remember, if you subtract a negative from a negative, you essentially add it, so then you get a 1.5. The reason, like, you know, a lot of people think, like, okay, why even bother with EPDs? You know, why can't we just look at the actual measurements? You know, I know a lot of people are hung up on raw birth weights and things like that. Well, the reason why we use EPDs is because, first of all, raw measurements, just the basic measurement like that all you techs get, they contain both genetic and environmental effects, okay? We can adjust those, like every breed association. I don't know if Kari talked about this, but the breed associations will get them and they'll send out a report back to the breeder, and it will have maybe adjusted ultrasound measurements. Those have been corrected for some of the environmental effects, but not all. Like they'll be corrected for age of the animal. You know, so we do have a, you know, like however many days of age they are, we'll up their, you know, either add or subtract to their actual measurement just to make them on an even keel with animals that are all 365 days old. But it doesn't get at all of them. Contemporary group ratios, those have been corrected. You know, the measurements that go into those, they've been corrected for some of the environmental effects, and they're okay in that they can be used to compare animals, but they can only be used to compare animals that are within that contemporary group. They can't be compared across a herd because we don't have the environment, like we don't take into effect the environmental effect of that contemporary group compared to others. So EPDs, they contain only the genetic effects, and that's what we're more interested in when we're selecting bulls. Like, what can that bull give to a herd, like in terms of genetics? And we can compare animals across the whole population that those EPDs were computed on. With IGS, we do have the 12 different breed associations. We have over 16 million animals in the database, and we can compare all those animals together, okay? So when we, you know, look at this suite of traits and you run around, you know, maybe you're thinking, I don't know if you are, but why don't we have like an ultrasound ribeye EPD or an IMF EPD or an ultrasound fat EPD or scan weight EPD? Well, the thing is that we do have two different kinds of traits. We have those that are economically relevant and those that are indicator traits. And an economically relevant trait is a trait that directly impacts the economics of a cattle operation. You know, it has a direct impact. And an indicator trait doesn't have that direct impact, but it does help in the genetic prediction to get EPDs for these ERTs. An example would be calving ease and birth weight. Like, we do use birth weight as an indicator of calving ease. Like in general, heavier birth weights are associated with more calving difficulty, but there's a lot more that goes on in calving ease than just birth weight alone. And, if you think about it too, like birth weight is just part of it. That doesn't necessarily have like an economic value to the producer, but calving ease does. Like difficult calves are more, it takes more in labor and things like that. So it does have a direct economic impact. And what we're talking here right now is that ultrasound is, when we look at Carcass and ultrasound, Carcass is all the Carcass traits are the ones that are economically relevant. Animals get, paid on, we look at the carcasses and pay them, based on quality and yield grade. And the ultrasound traits are only the indicators of those Carcass traits. But the usefulness of an indicator, whether they are useful or not, depends on what the genetic correlation of that trait is with the ERT. So if the genetic correlation is close to 0, it's going to be a poor indicator, but if it's close to plus or minus 1, it's going to be an excellent indicator. And ultrasound, like the folks when they were doing the research at Iowa State at the very beginning of this, they're finding that ultrasound traits are very good indicators of Carcass traits, and that they have a moderate to high genetic correlation. Okay, with the IGS, let's see, I can't get this going again. Okay, with the IGS evaluation, the genetic correlations that we're using between ribeye and ultrasound ribeye are 0.66. They can only go up to plus 1, so that's a fairly high value. Marbling and percent IMF are a 0.71, and we have the genetic correlation between fat and ultrasound fat as a 0.81. And we estimated these years ago, probably in the early 2000s. We have a lot more data now, different breeds, things like that, so we decided to re-estimate them. The last set of estimates we got are right here. Ribeye and ultrasound ribeye are now at a 0.57. Marbling and percent IMF stayed the same at a 0.71, but fat and ultrasound fat have really dropped. Fat has always been, I don't know why, I think, maybe because there isn't as much variation among the continental breeds, I don't know, but that has dropped to a 0.35. But, it's, but we are still looking into this. We're trying different models to estimate these, but this was the last batch. So I don't know if we're going to use these or not in the next run, but we are redoing them. So, okay, so just in summary, EPDs, we use them to compare animals for their genetic potential as parents, and genetic evaluation, overall traits, whether they're growth, reproductive, or Carcass traits, we remove the environmental influences on a phenotype just to get at the genetic effects. And as a selection tool, EPDs are much more superior to raw and adjusted measurements and contemporary group ratios because we have eliminated all the environmental influences. And ultrasound data has given us a faster, less expensive way to prove a bull's genetic merit for Carcass traits, and given us a better Carcass evaluation overall. Ultrasound traits are very useful indicators of Carcass traits, and the genetic correlations between ultrasound traits and their Carcass counterparts are moderate to high in most cases. So I'd like to see if any of you have questions.
Lauren, I got a question from Jeff Schoenfelder. His question is, how much carcass slaughter data is taken and provided to the breed associations?
For actual carcass slaughter data, not much. At the Simmental Association, over the years, there's been a carcass merit project where it's actually a design progeny test. Over the years, we've collected over 10,000 records. I'd say most breed associations, other than Angus, probably have a lot less than that. Carcass data is very difficult to obtain, because you essentially have to retain ownership through slaughter to get at it. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any hands raised. Go ahead and type your questions into the dashboard, guys, if you have any, and we'll certainly get them answered for you.
Yeah, I know I kind of did that fast. It's kind of difficult talking on these things without any audience participation. So I don't know if I blew you away or if it was too easy or not. So.
Eric Gelbvieh has a question. He says, please explain again why fat and UFAT has a lower correlation today than in previous years.
That I really don't know. I don't have a good explanation for that. Other than that, I do know that fat has just been difficult to get good genetic parameter estimates for. I think it's just because there's not much variation in it. Excuse me. Like fat thickness, it just doesn't vary much. Excuse me. And in relation to, continental breeds, there really isn't that much variation. So that's about, all I can think of. I don't know, we are looking at different models to see if we can improve that.
So what's the correlation of the fat traits?
Pardon me?
What is, well, I guess the second part of his question was, he said, I always thought that the fat trait was the highest correlation when using ultrasound. So do we know what the correlation of that is?
It depends on the population.
Okay.
Because, genetic correlations are population dependent, as are like means and standard deviations. It just depends on the population you compute them from. Mm-hmm. And in some breeds, they might have a higher correlation. I don't know, but just my own experience with the continental breeds is it just seems like they don't have as much. But we are looking into different models and just seeing what, is going on with that.
Okay.
But the other two genetic correlations, after all this time, and with the additional amounts of data, we're, finding that, they've stayed pretty much the same over all these years, and with different breeds included.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have another question here from Jeff Schoenfelder. He says, have Zoetis and any of the other companies doing genetic testing been encouraging breeders to scan cattle or simply do the genetic test?
That I don't know. We tell people to still collect data. I don't know what Zoetis is doing. We don't deal with Zoetis. We deal with GeneSeek. I'm sure they would be saying to collect phenotypes. You need phenotypes in order to continue training your populations for the DNA testing. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure they would be encouraging people to do that, but I really don't know what they're doing. I know breed associations tell their members to continue to collect phenotypes, though.
Mm-hmm. We work. We actually do quite a bit of the same. We work with GeneSeek, and we send our DNA in. They run it on the SNP panel, whichever one we tell them. But as far as I occasionally, depending if we're trying to evaluate some of the SNPs that I get back, I have questions on, and so I occasionally do send them recorded some of the data that we gather so that we can try to clean up some of the problems, especially because I work with a lot of line bred herds, and so that's we're trying to clean up a lot of issues with those things. But as far as the breeds or the genetic companies telling us to go ahead and scan, I don't really think that's their purpose, maybe not necessarily their job. So it goes back to the breed associations themselves, because they apply a different test, or they use the bluff, like Lauren was saying. They use the two bits of information together to get the right answer, or to get the answer, or whatever one they're giving you. So, I feel like the genetic companies, they have their purpose, but they're not necessarily dabbling in the same kind of things that the rest of us are.
Yeah, although they do want to have a good product too, so they probably want to continue training their own.
Well, they definitely don't turn the data down, but at the same time, they work more so, with the breed associations or with researchers to, improve their testing.
And also, they're going to sell their own product over collecting phenotypes too.
True.
So I'm sure there is probably some bias with them where they are promoting their product more heavily than saying like, oh, you have to also collect phenotypes, but I really don't know.
Yeah. I have another question here from Eric Gelbvieh, and hopefully, Eric, I'm getting your name pronounced correctly. Why have some of the breed associations dropped the rump data collection? I have been told in some conversations that carcass rump fat and carcass rib fat data in some breeds are not as highly correlated. For example, continental breeds may not have as high a correlation versus English breeds. Is this a correct assumption?
I don't know about the correlations at all. I know when it first started, I think a lot of breeds just never used rump fat just because they wanted, there was ultrasound ribeye area and carcass ribeye area, and then ultrasound, back fat or rib fat and carcass fat thickness, and I think they just, I think most breeds just probably thought, oh, well, we don't need the rump fat, because there's really no counterpart to that necessarily. I think it's probably more historical. And I know with Simmental, I don't ever see any of the data that comes in or anything, but I know we don't use that in our genetic evaluation. And when I was with Limousin, we did not use it either. But I think it was more just, kind of like, oh, well, we don't need this rib fat. So I'm not familiar with any of the correlations. I'm pretty sure that Angus does use it, but I think they might be one of the few breed associations that does.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Clint's got one. Excellent. Many bull producers in my area are under the impression that the 50K is enough information. Can we start publishing some comparison charts that show the difference in genetic testing only, or only carcass accuracy versus genetic testing combined with ultrasound data?
Yeah, we probably could. That might be something that UGC could do too. I do know that breed associations, if they're doing their jobs, they're telling people, like, you have to do both. You can't just say, just DNA test and leave it at that. We tell people to do both. Like, there's probably a little bit more added accuracy from both. I think with these yearling animals with ultrasound and DNA, I don't know, offhand, like, it depends on the heritability of the trait and things like that, but DNA could be more powerful in some instances than ultrasound and vice versa. But we do tell people, though, that they should do both. Yeah, I know that didn't really answer the question, but, I know that, a lot of techs probably think, like, oh, we're going to, lose market share to DNA, and I'm sure you probably are, but, we do try to tell our members, though, that they have to, if they're going to DNA test, they still have to collect phenotypes.
Mm-hmm.
You all have good questions.
How are we doing, guys? Anybody else have any questions out there? You might be typing, so I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Let me see here. Is this Clint again? I might get my mouse here working. Yes, Clint is back. Can the source verified programs start incorporating carcass data after harvest?
I don't know if I understand that. I don't know if I understand the question. What do you mean by incorporating carcass data after harvest?
We'll give him a second to type back.
No.
The source verified programs, follow the animals through the whole chain. And I'm really not the one, to ask that, because I really don't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see why they couldn't start following animals through the whole chain. I'm sure each program is different, though.
Yeah, well, here it is.
You have different resources, too. Some breed associations have more people that maybe could get at that data, but
he says, my impression of the source verified seems to find out exactly where progeny originate and where they end up. If the producers have to provide that information, I think the packers should have to disclose the carcass results and give that information back on the source verified systems.
Yeah, that would be nice. I really don't, I can't comment on that because I just don't know what's involved with the source verified programs. I don't know anything about the interaction among the various, like the feeders and packers and stuff like that. So I really can't comment on that. I'm sorry, but, I would think that whoever, owned those animals could request it and get it, but it's probably easier said than done. That's a lot of what the carcass data collection is like. It's very hard to get, because they, because of the identity, keeping the animal's identity through the whole chain. But I don't see why they couldn't get that stuff if, if everyone was willing to share.
Well, Clint says that I believe that would further substantiate the data collection that UGC techs collect. Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. We could share all of the data that we collect everywhere. It would just make us all that much further ahead.
But I think that's one reason why ultrasound kind of started, because, packers just weren't getting the data back, and, it was expensive to get. It was, impossible to get in a lot of cases, and I think it's still a lot like that. I still think it's really difficult to get the actual carcass data.
Well, there is a cost associated with it if you want to get it. So.
Yeah. And if we would have had, if carcass data were easy to get, they wouldn't even have developed ultrasound, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
If it would have been just an easy thing to get, So I still think there's, until we can get carcass data on every single animal, I think ultrasound's probably pretty safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, typically when you collect carcass data, it has to come through a USDA employee who will go into the inspector typically is also, a USDA grader. Sometimes the grader is a separate person. It just kind of depends. But, part of that, the trouble with that is getting the grader in there, and then he has to be paid, or you have to pay him, or he has to be contracted to do that, and then they can share the data. But that's essentially what's the issue, is that somebody has to pay for it, and who's going to do it. So unless it's for a specific person or a specific market, customer, etc., that's where some of that comes from. I know how to grade. I grade my own cattle, and it's just for my information. But for other people, if they're doing a lot or a few, that's when it becomes problematic. So, but it's not that it's the data is excellent if we can get it. That's the thing. So, just if we could get it and share it with everybody, it would just make us all that much smarter. So,
yeah. But then if we could get it easily, you guys would all be out of a job probably. Too. If we could,
That's true.
But, it's just, historically, it's just been really difficult to get.
Well, everyone wants to leave the government out of it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So have we got any other questions, folks? That might have been the last one. I haven't seen anything new since that. One came in about 4 minutes ago. It's taking about 3 to 4 minutes for a question to get posted, I believe, depending on what I'm seeing. So we'll give it here just a couple more minutes, and then if there aren't any questions, then we'll sign off and tell everybody thank you for attending. And we'll make sure that you guys get your credits for being on here. And hope everybody has a very happy Thanksgiving, and we'll all catch up with you all very soon. Lauren and Kari, appreciate your talks. They're very informative. Thank you for being a part of it. And Kathy Schaefer, thank you so very much for setting up the webinar. We couldn't have done it without Kathy at the Simmental Association. So everybody send her a big shout out and say thanks.
No problem.
And Clint, I agree. Prime rib is a wonderful alternative to turkey. That's how we roll. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
All right.